It's too late for me. I'm all done in. I'll soon be answering for all my sin. I was blind and deaf, and without hope. This is no life. It's a crappy joke. Come on, priests, when to God you cry. For all my needs, he was nothing but shy. Don't you worry about me or about my sins. I'll sort it out with him. If he does exist.
This is a man who's ready to bring charges against God himself at the Last Judgment. His name is Alexander Suvorov. He lives in a small apartment in Moscow's suburbs, and at 2 o'clock every Thursday afternoon, he sits by his front door wearing a device around his neck. The moment it vibrates and the lights turn red, he knows a delivery has arrived, and it's time to open the door. Every week for many years, a courier has regularly delivered meals for Alexander from a nearby restaurant. He knows his client is blind and deaf, but still tries to talk to him.
Here are the bread rolls. I'll leave them on the table. There. Okay, that's it then.
The courier can't understand how anyone can live without hearing or sight. He has no idea that this particular deaf and blind man, unable even to cook a simple meal, is more deserving of admiration than pity. Not everyone has successfully achieved a PhD and then become a professor of psychology. Fewer still who are deaf and blind. Alexander Suvorov is one of them. A great accomplishment for anyone, but truly remarkable for a man who lives in complete darkness and silence, only able to perceive the world through touch.
Wait. Let me check. Okay. So this is a halo, yes?
No, it's a hand.
A hand? Oh, yes. So these are fingers I can feel here. Right. This is a hand with...
This is a hand with a palm holding a child.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. I should pray, but only to a mother and her child.
10 years ago, Meliton, the priest, was a clown and acrobat in a circus. Now he serves in a church affiliated to Russia's only children's home, specializing in deaf and blind kids. His aim is to help them bear their cross humbly and wait for the next world. He's also unraveling the mystery of the home's most famous graduate, Alexander Suvorov.
I'm interested in exactly what makes him tick, what drives him, what it's based on. The foundation. It doesn't matter to me whether it's faith or intuition.
I can call myself a believer because I believe in mutual humanity, in its necessity. And if that doesn't ultimately prevail, all of mankind is doomed.
As a graduate from Moscow State University's psychology faculty, Suvorov could have spent his life with books, as a scholar. Instead, he chose a more difficult path, to work with deaf and blind children.
I saw there were people who needed my psychology more. They became the center of my universe. As a junior research assistant at first, I had to develop an experimental work program for them. But I hate any kind of formality, especially when it comes to love. And I loved those kids right from the start.
Those kids know how tough it is to achieve what he has. It's very important for them to stay in touch with Alexander. We have a girl now, her name is Alyona. She's totally deaf and blind. I think he's very familiar with so much of what she feels and suffers. I think he's the only one who's really able to help her.
Alyona is terrified to walk by herself. The teacher guides her by the hand. Alexander gently tells her how important it is to overcome this fear and explains how he walks despite his condition.
What is it?
It's a walking frame. It has 4 wheels. It goes in front, and I hold it with one hand. In my right hand, I hold this. Do you know what it is?
I know, stick.
Yes. A folding stick. It's always in this bag on my frame. I always fought back fiercely when I felt they wanted to limit my independence in any way, because I was becoming 100% dependent. That's extremely demeaning. It devalues people and undermines what's most important to me: human dignity. What's that? Oh dear. We've had an accident. It's not the first time my frame has got me into trouble. Actually, it's the 3rd time in a couple of weeks.
When he goes out alone, he always wears a sign around his neck. My name is Alexander Suvorov. I'm deaf and blind. Please take my right hand and write on it in block letters. I will easily understand you.
I want some frozen foods. As usual, soups and main courses. Five types, okay?
Staff at the supermarket are not just serving someone with disabilities, they're also learning about humanity without even knowing it. Even the suspicious security guard, who usually watches over customers, always expecting trouble, offers to walk Suvorov home.
Okay. I can make it on my own from now on. Thanks very much. What's your name? I'm Alexander too. Just as it says here. Going to the shop is tough, but people often help.
50 years ago, classrooms in this school were equipped with the very latest in technology. Deaf and blind students took part in a huge scientific experiment meant to change the future for mankind. Soviet scientists wanted to prove that intelligence was not hereditary, that with the brain's endless potential, any child, regardless of nature, could become a talented adult.
I never minded being part of the experiment. I was okay about being a guinea pig, if science needed it.
Alexander sometimes visits his former headmaster. He's 83 now and almost blind. Though his memory is failing, he still remembers how his best pupil was hungry for knowledge.
It was nice to talk to him. He was easy to teach. Besides, he loved to read. I remember our library was being renovated, and we put the books in a shed. Alexander often sat in there with a braille book. One day he was in there when somebody locked the door. Apparently they didn't realize he was there. He went really crazy.
I tried to be an all-in-one genius who achieved great things in whatever he did. I wanted to be immortal, eternal. I suppose you could say I was playing God.
Alexander Suvorov is 6 months old in this picture. He was born completely healthy, but when he was 3 years old, he went gathering apples with his parents, and on that day, his typical happy childhood came to an end.
It was early in the morning. I remember dark green leaves and the sun shining through. The ground was mottled with sunlight, but I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see those little apples, so I was fumbling, feeling for them. My mother picked me up and began to cry. She realized I had problems with my vision. Then in 6 years, the same happened with my hearing. That was August the 1st, 1962.
The loss of hearing was the most difficult to get used to. Alexander could still read using his hands, but life without music was unbearable.
I call this my musical harness. I was shocked the first time I put this loudspeaker up to my chest. At last I could clearly feel the band's drum. And so I solved the problem of rhythm. Now I can hear the music and relax.
Nobody knows exactly why Alexander Suvorov lost his sight and hearing, though his case files reveal a dark family secret. Alexander's mother and father met and fell in love. Both had lost their parents during the Stalin era, and both had been raised in orphanages. They simply considered it a happy coincidence that they shared the same second name. Only after years had passed did they finally discover the awful truth. Husband and wife were also brother and sister, perhaps explaining their son's disability.
One day he went to a park and then came home to me. I remember I was doing some laundry and he asked me, "Mama, how am I going to live? I don't understand anyone and they don't understand me." I said, "Let's go for a walk." As we walked, he asked me, "Mom, are you happy?" I said, "Yes, Then he asked me, even having a son like me? I said yes.
This is an amateur film taken in 1972. Alexander is 19. He and 3 other former students at the experimental school have just passed their exams. He was a Moscow University student headed to Leningrad and the Baltic Republics for a holiday. The teachers were certain that the excursion would be good for him, but it was then that he seriously began to think about suicide.
It was a tough month. I couldn't get through it. I couldn't cope with not enjoying music, art, or sculpture. I couldn't feel it completely. It was all too much. In a few years, all that emotional stress transformed into suicidal tendencies. It was only because I was loved, and I could feel it, that I didn't kill myself.
Hello, man.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello, Boris the Prophet. Remember 30 years ago, you told me I was going to have the same difficulties with my own Alexander Suvorov?
This experiment was insanely cruel, but just as cruel and violent as life is itself. For someone who has nothing but pain and grief to overcome, the only option is madness. But still, a person who has lost some of their senses can be taught a lot. They just have to learn to use their remaining senses in the right way. Of course, I'm primarily talking about the sense of touch.
This unique footage is from the archives of the Special Education Institute at the Russian Academy of Science. In 1963, the decision was taken to teach deaf and blind kids everyday skills first and speech second. The results were exceptional. Within a few years, many were able to speak, read, and write. But the success was welcome only as far as allowing the students to work in manufacturing, perhaps operating a sewing machine. Soviet society wasn't ready to consider that blind and deaf people might also become academics.
It's all contrived and overblown. How can they work in academia? They have to be useful, do something real. They'll earn their bread, their country guarantees it. They'll always be safe here, but I still think that they should do something. Maybe something small. Let them have their own specialty. They should feel that the government needs their knowledge, and they have to feel needed. But how can we consider anyone so handicapped to be complete?
Had it not been for that speech, Alexander Suvorov may never have decided to write his doctoral thesis or achieve the title of professor. He would not have written his research articles or addressed academic conferences. Through every moment of despair, it was because he remembered those cruel accusations of deficiency that he forced himself to keep going, to continue living and working.
I've always said it's not just handicapped people who have to overcome difficulties. If it's not an achievement for an ordinary person, it shouldn't be thought of as an achievement for us either. I'm talking about higher education and finding an interesting job.
I deeply appreciate all that you do, and I'm so grateful that you're here. You're a great man. You've changed people's lives. You've changed my life, and I'll never forget you.
All in all, I consider myself happy, judging by the outcome of my life. All my dreams have come true. I even have a son now.
Oleg Guriev is not actually his son, but his official guardian and assistant.
Go and wash your hands, mucky pup.
I'm surprised you didn't want to become a teacher.
They met 12 years ago on a mountain hike. Two lonely people, a deaf and blind professor and a 14-year-old boy who'd run away from home.
I felt bad, bored, lost at home. It was tough. My parents were divorced, and I know my mother felt really bad about it. I could feel her grief in the air. It was like an endless feeling of hopelessness.
One day I just stroked his head, mumbling to myself, "My boy." That made him happy. He jumped up, saying, "Yes, I'm your boy." I didn't expect that. I was a bit shocked. Then I decided to call him my son. Silently at first, and then I whispered it. Oleg took to it well. He accepted it.
It took a while to get used to the idea that I was important to this person. He can't imagine living without me now. And I feel good about that. I don't take it too seriously, but still I do feel responsible for him. It was my choice to come and live with him, so I have no right to turn away to leave him.
As with all families, the son grew up and met a girl. He's often out on dates, while the father stays at home complaining that he needs company.
I lack personal contact. Personal, not virtual. I have plenty of virtual contact, but almost no personal.
The only person willing to talk to him for hours is Meliton. The priest, who works with the Home for Deaf and Blind Children, still tries to bring the stubborn professor into what he considers the light of Orthodox Christianity.
I can't believe that someone so sincere isn't able to find in the Almighty Father something useful and interesting. If you can't, then maybe you are absolutely blind and deaf, spiritually and mentally. To those who've suffered for 50, 60, or 70 years, God will give much more than to those who can see and hear.
You know I'm not greedy.
God has so much for me and for you and for everyone who wants to be with him. So you will feel grateful.
The most interesting thing is that I sincerely doubt that this peculiar dialogue will ever take place, like a post-mortem.
Okay, let's make a deal. The first to go there...
How?
Lets the other one know.
And how's that?
If the other world exists. I don't know yet.
Oh, you don't know.
We'll see.